We're Ashley and Sabrina,
your co-host for Ruck Up Buttercup podcast.
Military life can be challenging,
but also has its advantages.
Come and be part of the unfiltered
and sometimes unhinged conversations with fellow military spouses, Kayla and Laura, as we dive into the occasional rant
and rave of military life.
Share the stories that make us who we are,
and showcase the amazing organizations
and resources out there that make our lives a little bit better.
Whether you're new
or a seasoned military family,
we all need a little extra love.
So, Ruck Up Buttercup, we got your six.
Ruck Up Buttercup podcast can be found on all your favorite streaming locations. As well, we are now available on Reach Across America Radio on Fridays at 11 p.m. and Sundays at 1 p.m. Eastern. You can find Reach Across America Radio on the iHeartRadio app, the Odyssey app, and the TuneIn app. Just search the word Reef. Can't wait to see you there.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode, a surprise episode for you guys here in season 5. We have a very special guest with us, great friends. We love them over at LOGSA, and we're really excited to have Isabel join us today because we have a really pretty hot topic to talk about today. But before we get into that, Isabel, why don't you tell us a little about yourself and how LOGSA Mil Moves started?
Yeah, absolutely. First, thanks ladies for having LOGSA Mil Moves on the podcast. We're excited to be here and we're excited to bring you some breaking news. But before I get into that, I'll kind of introduce LOGSA and the story of Wendy and myself and now Steve, who set out to essentially provide better moving services for families. Wendy and I have known each other since around 2000. We were both basic camp attendees into ROTC. So that's where we get that veteran status. We became friends at one of the ROTC camps and then went off into the Army, got married, had kids. We reconnected at Fort Irwin. Wendy was managing a large maintenance contract at Fort Irwin. We run into each other. She's like, oh my God, you got to come onto the team. I come onto the team. Eventually, Wendy moves on to, they've got a PCS. And so then I took that contract over. And it was having that job that had us kind of looking at each other going, we could do this for ourselves. Like there's so much like government waste, right? We could do this in a much more efficient and a way, right? Where we're satisfying the customer and we're making sure that we keep those ops teams that work out at Fort Irwin safe on their trucks. So we decided to launch LOGSA, and we were still unsure if what we wanted to go into was maintenance or something else. And Wendy calls one day in February 2020 and she said, I got it. The government is going to move to a single source contract. We didn't know much more about military moving than what just being a spouse, right? Or even an active duty member, because we'd done that as well. But she said, this seems like a good opportunity. We can maybe answer some of those problems that they have, and we can bring in military spouses. It's great all around. And I said, I'm all for it, so long as we can inject ourselves at the very bottom, because I want to see, as an operator, I want to see why things devolve at the bottom, right? And so then I can follow them up. And so we did that. We launched LOGSA Mil Moves in Fayetteville. That's why we have a special place in our heart for deployed love, because you guys do a lot of cool stuff out there. And we started as a pack team company. And so we were contracting military spouses and going in and packing homes because we knew that we could do it in a way that protected the family. And so our whole motto from the beginning was, it's not stuff, it's a story. It's the story of your life and service. That's the truncated version. But essentially, everything that we own is our life, right? We don't have community that we grow deep roots into. Literally, our community is the people that are around us every time that we move. And then the way that you cultivate and manage your home, right? That's important to military families. And so we wanted to protect that. We set out to protect that. 4 years, no claims on any of the packing revenue line item. But as we got deeper into it, we realized that a lot of families want more control and choice than just in that packing of those goods. And so it was 2022, in the fall of 2022, we decided to venture into the PPM lane, which is the personally procured move. So we knew, because families were like, well, do you just do the packing? Can you do the whole move for me? I've done a ditty. Other folks had done what was then, before called a ditty, a do-it-yourself move. And we said, yeah, I think we can do that. And so we set out to do a couple of things: continue to protect the family, give them control over who's touching their stuff, right? And then partner with all of those really excellent move teams that are already out there. We do have one tractor and trailer now in our little tiny one truck fleet, but it runs under another carrier because those insurances are just like, they're through the roof. And that belongs to Steve. That's Steve Meyer's tractor and trailer. He's now a part of LOGSA Mil Moves. But we said there's already a ton of small businesses out there. They're really, really good. They do a great job. They love military families. A lot of them are vets. They want to help be part of this like protection aspect. So we set out to create a network. And now what we manage is a network of incredible movers who are ready to execute your move in what's called a COD market. So when you do a PPM, if you're not familiar, you go to the government and you say, don't book me on a government move, just off ramp me, let me have my budget. You take your budget and you give us a call. We'll quote you. If we're too high, we'll work with you, right? Because we have a standard number that we work with, because that's how we know that number. Drivers are very, very comfortable with it. They are managing small businesses themselves. And so it's a win-win for everyone. In some cases, it's like, hey, that doesn't work for us. And we'll work with families. We'll call the driver and say, hey, can you this, right? So that's what we're doing right now is we're managing these moves. We're allowing families to have a ton of control, and we have the best claims to revenue ratio in the industry. It's 0.006, and it's only that high because I'm too lazy to go down into the gnats, because it's less than that, but I just kind of threw a number out. I did some easy math because I owed that number to someone. I threw it out there, but it's that good because again, we figured out the magic, the formula, and the formula is to protect the family. Right. If we have a quality control spouse in the area, we'll send a quality control spouse out to be with the family during portions of the move, if we can, because we don't have contractors in every single area. But then take care of that driver. And the driver, those owners, those business owners, they own those tractors and trailers. They want to do a great job because that means more work for them. Because now we've entered into this season where families are calling back and they're like, hey, I did my move. Joe was my driver. Can I get Joe? Hey, I did my move. Steve was my driver. Can I get Steve? Now, Steve, obviously everyone wants Steve to drive their stuff, or Joe. They stay really, really busy. But hey, Pinky was my driver. Can I get Pinky again? We love that because it means that those families establish relationships with those movers. That's how the moving industry worked in the past. And we've built our whole business around that. And so the point was, give military families the best possible move experience and protect the small businesses that know how to do this work and do it well, so that military homes, right, can be that for those families. They can be that warm, safe, comforting space, and you're not arriving on the other side with half your stuff missing or a bunch of it broken.
Yeah. So I had a question for you about that. You had talked about the way you guys packed personally when you first were starting the business. Is that something that you have trained these other moving companies in how to pack goods correctly? Because we just moved from Germany and our stuff is packed the most ridiculous. We'll open a box and there'll be a ladle in with my books. And it's I don't even understand how these were in the same room. I don't understand how this got into that box. It's the most asinine things happen. And the international, obviously you don't really have a choice. You have to do the government contract. That just kind of is what it is. But I'm curious to see how that works on your stateside, as far as other companies that are packing.
So we do offer that service, and we have done that in the past. We actually also have translated existing industry training into Spanish. That's something that was in our wheelhouse that a lot of folks had in their wheelhouse, but it was one or the other. So you had Spanish speaking teams and English speaking agents, right? We started to offer a bridge. And so we do that with industry. We will visit and we will train industry folks who want us to be there, right? We can train them on basically the LOGSA way and why the LOGSA way works. It's still baffling to me that a lot of companies will skimp on paper. Now, I know some families are I don't understand why I had so much paper. Listen, a lot of paper, that's always better than not enough.
Yeah, it's
not because, we can get paper at a price that is less than a Starbucks mug, right? You guys are out there paying retail. If you're doing a Diddy and you're not hiring a company, you're paying $25 for 10 pounds of paper. It's not like that for us because we're buying, we buy hundreds of pounds at a time. The paper is always cheaper. Basically one broken mug in a box is more expensive than what it cost me to buy 25 pounds of paper. So that was part of what we did in Fayetteville was we trained our contractors. We trained a lot of them at the 12 million plus building, the Instant Teams building there in Southern Pines. It's a great question because I think in the future, we're going to be doing a lot more of that. and a little less moving if we don't all en masse support this petition that we're going to talk about a little bit later.
Yeah. And the other thing you were talking about, and I can't believe I'm saying this, like, as someone who's been a part of the military community for over 35 years, I didn't know you could request, like, people during when you PCS, like, when you go in and say, hey, like, you know, this, we want to be assigned this company. I didn't even know you could do that until
I thought it was like government or do it yourself. Yeah.
I didn't know. And it wasn't until I was talking to Stephanie and she's like, you can, Ashley. I'm like, well, that's fantastic news. I'm going to do that the next time we move, because I didn't know that was it. I thought it was just one of those really sucky parts about being a part of the military. We got to move. You're going to just get assigned to whoever is assigned to you. And you're just going to be kind of like shit out of luck if you get a really bad crew. And we've had some really great crews and we've had some really bad crews. I remember this last crew we had, they were really nice and everything like that. But like, they definitely were like stabbing each other behind the back. Like if something was broken, they're like, what number's on that box? Cause I'm not like, you know, that, who carried that in or who packed it or anything like that. And I was just like, whoa, it's not that big of a deal. I'm just saying, hey, like, I had one thing damaged in the entire move. And I was like, it's not that, well, actually we had a couple things missing, but nothing was like
a lot of electronics.
It really wasn't. Well, it was my air fryer that was damaged, which of course, like the one thing that we use like all the time, which I don't even know why it didn't cut, because we always do like a little partial ditty. We always have a small amount of stuff that comes with us, depending on where we're obviously moving, but this past time we rented a small U-Haul because my husband had his motorcycle, and I was like, oh, well, we're only moving 4 hours away. That means I can bring my plants and all that kind of stuff. So like, it was great. We did a little partial ditty, but I was like, I don't know why we didn't bring that with us in the U-Haul, because we use that every day. So that kind of sucked that we had to like wait for anyone to come in, but like odds and end things, like Sabrina was saying, like we found like random things were put into random things. And so now that I have all these books, I was talking to Stephanie about this, I think in November, I was like, okay, so what do I need to do about my books? Because I've seen so many horror stories about books just being absolutely destroyed. And so I was like, I told Jeremy the other day, I was like, I think we're just going to put them in the U-Haul when we move this year. And sorry, you're going to have to carry those big old totes. Because I was just like, I don't want to risk it. But, you know, we learn something all the time. Like and the industry is always changing, like you're saying. And we, you know, have something that is happening right now that I didn't know about it until Isabel sent me the article the other day, when I was just like, hey, do you want to come on to the podcast? We haven't had you yet. And this could really, really affect how people move not in just one way, but in multiple ways. So can you tell us what this new global household goods contract is doing or will do to our community?
So I had a lot of faith that folks at Homesafe would essentially do the right thing when it came to the PPM. They're executing on the contract now. So here's what everyone needs to know. Whereas before, you would have had the option to put in a mover of choice, not guaranteed that the government was going to be able to maneuver the move into that to that company, because the government, essentially all of the providers that were in the system, they have to kind of take turns at the work, right? They get turns at the wheel. Here's a fun fact. When the initial contract for a single source went out, Transcom was operating under a false pretense. Transcom was operating under the assumption that there were 900 service providers. That wasn't exactly true. There were like some large move managers that managed hundreds of those SCACs. Tier 1 was a company that managed around 250. So that means they had 250 turns at the wheel, essentially. So there weren't 900 companies. Take 250 of those and assign them to one company. And then take another like 100 and some odd and assign them to a different company called TMM. Then take 70 or 80, assign them to Sudeth or National Van Lines, one of those large van lines. That's really more what the landscape looked like. So they were operating under a false narrative, and they said, hey, there's just too many providers out there. We need to wrangle all this in. And the quote is, we need to have one neck to choke. So they put out a contract to turn all military moving into a single source contract. So whereas before you had a market essentially, and movers competed for the government work by telling the government, hey, I'll do it at a discount. So the government provides the tariff, right? So basically the rate at which anyone can move. And then companies compete with one another by giving a discount, right? So like I say, hey, I'll do that move, but I'll do it for 20% off. And then someone else, mover B, goes, hey, I'll do that move, but I'll do it for 25% off, right? I'll do it for 75 cents on the dollar. Whereas Isabel's charging you 80. That's essentially how people competed in the system. And so they took a combination of that discount plus your customer satisfaction, like survey scores, and they came up with something called a best value score. And then that's how they, if anybody's familiar with an OML, like an order of merit list, that's essentially how you tiled out in the system. Like you're the top, this guy's number 2, 3, 4, 5 in these areas. And that's how that work was divvied out. Again, there weren't 900 providers ever. There were 900 SCAT codes that were also commoditized, and there were companies that bought up hundreds of them, and they were managing those. Well, that company, Tier 1 that I mentioned, they end up eventually winning the contract with KBR. So Tier 1 and KBR, two companies get together, and they create an entity called Homesafe. And Homesafe eventually, after it was awarded, contested, and re-awarded, they win the re-award. And they are now the single source manager. So you don't have that choice anymore. You can't go in and say, hey, I actually want this other mover. Homesafe is a move manager. Tier 1 never owned an asset. They didn't own a truck, a trailer. They've never owned warehouses. Essentially, they're move managers who are, let's use the word broker. They're a broker. They take the government money, and then they go to me and they say, Isabel, can you do this work for, I could have booked it with the government for maybe like 50 cents. They're like, hey, Isabel, I got this job for you. It pays 25 cents of that tariff. Yeah. Or really that's what they're trying to pay the member on a PPM. They're paying more like here's 30 cents, right, on the tariff, maybe, 28 cents, something like that. You don't have that choice anymore. There's only one move manager. So all military moving, to include the PPM, is now adjudicated or managed by Homesafe. And I think if they had left the PPM alone, then it'd be fine. But I'm actually pretty upset because now you've taken a family's entitlement that Congress and the industry, everyone fought to make sure that was protected. So military members always had the option to off-ramp. The fact that Homesafe is taking as much of the rate as possible and leaving a family like not enough to do a move on their own, I see two problems with that. Number one is that the regulation is written in a way that protects that rate. So in other words, whatever the government constructed cost is, whatever the government is paying that move manager or mover, that's what they have to pay the member. Not too long ago, there was an act introduced, and what happened, maybe it wasn't quite an act, but basically we were allowed to have 100% of that PPM entitlement, whereas before it was only like 90, and then it was 95, and then it was like, okay, just give them all 100% of average rates, right? It used to be average because, again, there were all these movers. So all of the rates filed under those 900 SCAT codes, those all were averaged out in each lane. And then let's say like from Virginia to Florida, the average was around 50. That's what they paid a family, right? You get the average. You don't get the best. You don't get the worst. You get right in the middle. Well, now Homesafe, the rates that they're pushing out to families, and I worked on some rates this morning, they look more like 74.5. A family moving from Joint Base, they're moving from Maryland. So, no, in New Jersey. I'm sorry. This is Dix Lakehurst in New Jersey. So they're moving from New Jersey to Florida, 8,000 pounds. The equivalent discount that Homesafe is offering them to do their move is 74.5%. Right. So they get a quarter basically on that dollar tariff that the government has. If they moved, what that means in dollars, let's talk dollars because that's easier for people to understand. So Homesafe said you got $6,000 to do your move. The same move, if it's done through the government program that averages out that average, right? Not the most expensive mover, not the cheapest mover, right in the middle, right now would pay $12,000. So my question is, are they keeping $6,000 just to write a check to the family once they submit their weight tickets? Because if so, like, I call foul on the play. In terms of waste, right, that would be an incredible amount of waste. If the government is paying them, a 50% rate, which is about normal right now, which we don't know because Homesafe, they essentially bid on the contract and said, we're going to do all the work for this number. We don't know what that number is. but I know it's not a quarter. I know that they didn't tell the government, hey, I'm going to do 350,000 moves for a quarter. Yeah, and I know mover math is really confusing, and I can send diagrams and charts and pictures later.
Well, and I think what's really interesting about this is a lot of people would choose to do a PPM or a Diddy, however you know that term by, because the out of expense cost of moving already is so high for military families. Like, you know, whether like replacing groceries, you know, deposits on everything nowadays, you know, deposits and all that kind of stuff. Like, it really adds up. I feel like every time we move, we're paying at least $2,500 to $3,000 out of pocket for all these other things that are not included in those fees.
At least. I mean, it really depends on where you're moving. Like we were supposed to be moving to Colorado, and the deposits on rentals are $5,000.
Yeah.
So like to have that kind of cash money, like you're saying, is not something that people have. And that's why you choose the Diddy or the PPM moves, because you're like, oh, well, I can cut corners, right? I can try to cut costs here where I can so that I have some of that extra change at the end of my move to pay for those things, because you don't think about it. When we literally moved 3 weeks ago and we don't have cleaning supplies, we don't have a full pantry, because it's going to take us months to finally like build that stuff back up because it's so expensive.
Yeah, that's the most insulting part of this. Like now I'm you know, this happened late December. And so the team we've been on the phone every single day to go, how are we going to mitigate? What are we going to do? Because we know that as move managers, we can't help families at that rate. There's not enough for them to even just book a move. They're not going to have enough for us to help like walk them through the process. Because obviously we're a business as well. And we were never in the business to take as much as we could for a family. It was literally, how can we do this in a way that protects you and in a way that keeps that driver on the road, but incentivizes them to do this really great job. We had just found that sweet spot. And here's the insulting part is that these board people sitting around a table, they're going, well, they don't need that much money. Like what family needs that much money? No.
I feel like that's in every conversation about everything. And it makes me so angry.
Oh my God. It makes me angry because I'm sitting here and I'm like, well, number one, you, right? The president, I'm like, you made millions of dollars off of taking points off of moves. These families are recouping. They're not making money. They're earning sweat equity because they're recouping dollars that they spent elsewhere. So what they say to you when they say, here's your $6,000, that's enough to rent a truck, right? And you go, wait a second, hold on though. It's not just a truck. Yeah. It's fuel, it's packing material, and it's time. And literally like
food. I mean, there's so many things on that.
Is not valuable. Like when they push out that, I'm now mad. I'm like, when they push out that number, they go, your time is not valuable. You military spouse are going to pack your whole house for free. Even though we would have paid a mover to do it, you can do it for nothing. Here's your $6,000 just to get a truck, and you don't get paid to load it, and you don't get paid to unload it and take it apart and put it back together and pack it. Like you don't get that money. That's not for you. That's for us as an admin fee. We need $6,000 to administrate this move for you.
Like a spouse that like really does like make me angry, because it's we put, as spouses and service members and families, we put in so much time into the military. Like we give up time. We do so much. So for them to be like, your time is not worth it.
No.
It's really not okay. And you know, obviously, like, you know, a lot of people are going to be like, oh, well, I'll just go with the contractor now, blah, blah, blah. But like at the same time, like you're not going to have control over that. You're not going to have, you know, I'm just like thinking like in my brain, like, I'm like, okay, we have a motorcycle. Like we have all these other things that like, you know, we've always kind of moved ourselves. We've always done like kind of that partial Diddy, like, you know, I was saying earlier. And it's one of those things where it's just like, well, that's all going to have to be out of pocket now. Like, you know, we're going to have to do this out of pocket because it's not going to be really
enough.
Yeah, it frustrates me so much is that you were saying, oh, well, they're paying themselves. None of that money, I don't think ever goes towards anything extra. This is all moving expenses, whether they think that just moving is packaging and a truck and then unloading. It's not. It is buying groceries. It is deposits. It is all these other things that they should be giving to people when they move. There should be so much more moving expense than what we are.
I don't know why I've never done it.
Earning it. Like we earn it through PPM. Like we literally
living.
You can do it the LOGSA way and call me and say, look, I just want to know that my grandma's antique furniture that I've filled my house with is going to be safe, Isabel. You do everything for me. Great. But there are other families, young families. This is the problem, is young families do exactly what you're saying. They're like, hey, I can't afford all this other stuff, right? This peripheral stuff. So I'm going to do a Diddy because then I can recoup it. I'm not making anything. But then to add insult to injury and tell that family, here's your budget of $6,000 to move yourself, like however 1,000 miles, right? But you don't get paid for your labor because you're not valuable enough. Like, that's so insulting. And it brings up a second really great point about the way that they're adjudicating this program. If they came to me and they said, hey, I'm going to submit a PPM, because I am this summer, right? We're moving this summer probably to Fayetteville. Here's your PPM budget. And if it's too low and they've de-incentivized me, then I'm just going to say, well, that's not worth my time. Just go ahead and move me in the system.
Yeah.
That's a conflict of interest. In other words, they are giving you a number that is not possible. And so then the family's forced to just go into the system. So they win either way. But honestly,
it takes their free will away.
Here's the gross part. They'll make more money when families move themselves than when they move them, because they're going to write you a check for half the amount. They're going to keep the rest. And then you can't file a claim. You have, like, that's, everything's on you. So literally, like, if I'm the evil board member, it's like, like making these plans. I'm like, hell yeah, make them all move themselves, give them half the money. We make all this money doing nothing, basically just writing a check. Like it's a no-brainer if you're an evil board member. Like if you're just an evil person who's like, military families, they don't matter, like whatever.
Well, and another thing that I kind of see this being an issue with is, like, you know, with the amount of people going, okay, well, we're not going to do a Diddy move anymore because it's just not worth it. We're going to be paying a lot of, I foresee people paying a lot of expenses outside of that funds. Cause I mean, $6,000 in my brain, I'm like, the last time I looked up, like, you know, a pot or something like that was $3,500. That was just,
I can literally attest to this because we had to pay out of pocket to move across country. It is $5,000 from North Carolina to Arizona for just the U-Haul, not gas, not hotels, not food, not packaging, nothing else. So.
Yeah.
That's insane to think that military families are going to be able to do that. And like half the time, it's not a 4-hour move, like from North Carolina to Virginia. It's North Carolina to Alaska, North Carolina to Colorado, North Carolina to Texas, and it's a really far way.
Campbell to JBLM. The family, I think Fort Campbell to JBLM, almost 7,000 pounds. Right now, that move would get a family around $12,689 to do it. Homesafe says here's $7,296.
That's almost half. That is absolutely insane.
Half, right? The New Jersey one I mentioned, half, 6,000 Homesafe, 12,000 in the system.
And you know that's why you know. And the other thing I was thinking about it is, like, with people not doing these, like, you know, PPMs and things like that, like, and everyone just going through the contract, like, the backlog that we're going to see coming in of how long it's going to take, because we already have it. I just had a friend move last year, and they couldn't get, their orders came in, and they had, I think they had a report in, like, 3 months. They didn't have, they couldn't get anyone to them before that 3 months.
Here's the interesting thing. I've had so many phone calls come in. These are Homesafe booked moves. It's the winter time. Nobody's moving right now. Like, really, everyone moves in the summer. You've got like these 6 insane weeks. And then outside of that, it's you know, it's pretty slow. Mm-hmm. And they're calling us and they're going, hey, can you? And literally both times, right, we had within 24 hours, we had a crew ready to pack it, load it, and we had a driver to drive it. And both times the TMO came back to the family and convinced them not to off-ramp to a PPM and just to move with Homesafe. So not only is Homesafe de-incentivizing families, but the TMOs are de-incentivizing families and telling them, this is the contract, you got to move with the contract and don't pull your budget and go do this other thing. But I mean, we're like the smallest company out here, and we can in 24 hours find a way to execute. And this is like a behemoth, right? It's literally a David and Goliath story. This is a behemoth who cannot, with all the resources, right? Because supposedly they were gonna have like 8,000 providers or something crazy. With all those resources, cannot stitch a move with months of notice, because these families are like, we've had orders, we knew we were moving. It's literally Friday, I move on Monday, and I have no idea who's coming or if anyone's coming. Yeah.
And that was our experience when we moved up to Virginia. it was, hey, so-and-so will be there tomorrow. And I'm like, okay, for what? Like, why are you coming right now? And then they would send a crew. Like, I feel like every single time I've PCS, it's been a different experience. And that's just the military life. Like, everything's always different. But we had a crew come out and packed one. Like, I never had a crew come out where it was like over 4 or 5 days. Like, it's always one day. They came in, packed all morning, and then the truck was there that evening. This last move, it was over 3 days. And I was like, this is blowing my mind right now of like, and they didn't tell us that. Like, I was expecting everything to be gone that first day. And they're like, oh, no. We're only going to be here in the morning, pack this morning, and then we'll be back tomorrow to pack the rest of it. And I'm like, why are we doing like 2 different days to pack this? I mean, I've got stuff, but I don't got a lot of stuff.
And like, I know for us, we'd rather send out, and we talk to families about that. Like, when we talk to families and they're under 10,000 pounds, we'll just ask, we can do a 1-day pack and load, like, rather than bring out, a team on one day and another team the second. If you want to leave your, like, have all your stuff with you until that last day, we'll do you as 1 day. We'll just send out extra team members. And then as it's getting packed, it's getting loaded. And then some families love that. Some families are like, I don't want that. Like, it feels like chaos to me. I want 1 or 2 days, right? If you're over 16,000 pounds, and we have some families that are over, and typically that is a 3-day. It's 2 days to pack. And then it's like, they'll start loading on day 2 and finish loading on day 3. But those are options that you lose when you're not able to PPM and then communicate with someone who is on the hook. Here's the main difference. When you book with the government, right? Nobody's on the hook. Who are you going to call? The government contracted it for you. There's a middleman in there, right? When you PPM and you call us, I'm on the hook. We're on the hook. Wendy's on the hook. Steve's on the hook. Like, if you're not happy with something, number one, you're going to have all of our cell phone numbers because they're out there for God and everybody, right? But because you're using your money. Like, I don't get it twisted. The government's not paying me. Like, I have to do a good job. Wendy has to do a good job. Steve has to do a good job because you're paying us. Like, you're a customer who's out here in the free market. I have to do a good job. That's the beauty of the PPM, is you have that control. Now, some families do end up in a bad situation because they end up with brokers. That's really more about us getting out there and educating them on how to avoid those scams. Like, I'm telling you right now, if you go online and you put your phone number and your email into one of these, like, move from Virginia to California, $2,000. That's not possible. Like, the fuel for that is not, like, the math doesn't math. It's not happening, right? And then if you just look up a pod, you'll see, right, that nobody can do that move for that amount of money if you're trying to move like 10,000 plus pounds. So we got to educate families so that they're a little bit smarter, but they need to understand principally that when you book with the government, like, you've literally booked with the government. Like, you are not the customer. The government is the customer. So when you have a move with Homesafe, you're not the customer. You are the end user. There's a difference between an end user and a customer. With an end user, that means someone else is the customer. With the government and Homesafe is the customer. Like the government's procured Homesafe services, right? And you're just an end user. You PPM and you come out here, you are now the customer, and the customer, right, is king. Like, I know we've bent over backwards for a lot of our customers, and we really try hard to make sure that if a customer is not happy with a certain aspect of the move, that we fix that right away. We've had drivers that we've but basically that we've pushed back out of the network. So we'll bring you in and give you a shot. You already have to have a pretty good reputation, but man, we're a 1-shot, 1-kill, right? Like, if you do something that we just don't like, that's the last time, right, that we're going to work with you, because we care about those military families and we want them to have the experience that they want tailored to them.
Yeah, and it's definitely one of those things where, like, having that option and then having that kind of take, like, because I literally sit here going, like, we're going to be PCSing back to Liberty in the next 6 to 8 months. Not quite sure yet when. I'm hoping more of the 6-month time frame. And I'm just going like, this is just, it's changing a lot of things. And so changing a lot of my mindset, because I was like, my whole thing was like, oh yeah, we can go in and request who I want to use to move us and all this other kind of stuff. And then now having that, like, not as an option anymore, I'm like, oh, Like, this is.
But we can share a truck. So yeah. So if you're leaving at the same time I am, and because we won't have orders till February, we won't know. And
See, same. We won't know until about February, in the February timeframe.
Yeah, but then we'll share, we'll PPM together and we'll just put it all on one truck.
So, but what can we do right now? So you had said something earlier about how we can sign something that might help us change this up. Like, can you talk to us about what if you're listening, or our listeners listening, what can we do to kind of be like, oh no, I don't like this. Like, I don't think this is good. How can I help get more eyes on this and maybe change how this is operating?
Yeah, absolutely. If you care about military families and the entitlements that ensure that they have a good quality of life, then please sign Megan Harless's change.org petition to protect the PPM rate, regardless of whether or not you PPM or you don't PPM. That ability should not be taken away from military families, whether by de-incentivization or wholly, right? Families should have the option to protect their homes in the way that they see fit, the best way for them. And the PPM, the current PPM entitlement, allows families to have that choice. And so we should all care about it, whether we like to PPM or we don't. What we don't want is for that to go away, because if this global household goods contract ends up not working out, right, and we're all stuck in that old way, we don't have a voice. And so you should always protect your ability to have a voice and a say-so in how it is that you execute or adjudicate your own moves. This petition aims to protect that. And so when it has enough signatures, hopefully it goes before Congress, and Congress can at least halt this and look at it and go, okay, maybe there's a cap to the administrative fee on a PPM, or best case, they create it so there's no conflict of interest. Again, conflict of interest. They create a second contract that runs alongside the global household goods. So you can move with the system. That's one contract. If you PPM, you come over here, and that's a separate contract, because then you don't create this conflict of interest that Homesafe has created by basically de-incentivizing, right? Like, on this side, here's your move budget, and you can go and do what you like. I wouldn't be the guy pulling the strings and saying, if I make it low enough, they're going to have to move with us anyway. Yeah. So.
Well, like I was saying before, I think, like you're saying, even if it's not something that you think is going to affect you, what it is doing is taking away the free will of military families to make a choice for themselves in their life. Because yes, PCSing to like civilians on them side looks like, oh, well, that's a choice that they're making. They're not making that choice. That is our life. That is something that we are forced into doing already. We don't have free will over that choice, but we have free will over where we spend our money and how our money should be spent on moves. And I think just signing this, you can still choose to go with the contract. That's fine. Yeah. But you should give the free will back to the military spouses to choose what they want to do with their money.
And such a great point you make, because it's really us. It's the military spouses who are the ones that do all of the hard work when it comes to the move, right? Our military member brings the orders home, but more often than not, they're the ones figuring out.
Cluttering our house. Yeah, that's crazy.
And just like in the grand scheme of things, of like when you look at the cost of like just moving and things like that, like, the constant fluctuation of like housing market and the rental market and how that changes and how that's already not like how it should be. Like, the way that they come up with what we should get blows my freaking mind. Yeah. And that's also that's a whole nother topic we could spend forever talking about, because it's just one of those things where I'm just like, it doesn't cover the cost of what we get. And when you're moving every 2-3 years, like you're like, I feel like we're
you never recoup that money.
We never recoup it. Like the amount, I bet, like, I really wish I had taken the time and wrote down every time we move how much it costs, like how much did
I don't think I'd want to know. I don't think I'd want to see that, how much money is just like lost in the process of
just lost, like, and just things that you never get back. Like, yeah, like, oh, it's just a deposit, you get it back. Yeah, but like, you're not, like, some utility companies don't refund your deposits. Mm-hmm. You don't get pet deposit, depending on what state you move to, whether it's a fee or a deposit, you don't get that back.
Some landlords are just crappy and find ways to keep your money.
We're in Nova. This is like the worst place. There are no protections for people here, and the market is so saturated that no one's interested in like cutting any kind of deal for military. Most folks are out of pocket when it comes, even though they raise rates. Most of us are out of pocket when it comes to BAH because it's so expensive to live here. And so you have choices to make, right? They're like, well, you could live and commute out of wherever. And it's like, okay, but you're asking me, like, literally, he's working in the county where like the best schools in America are, but you're asking me to live 2 counties over so that I can afford a house and utilities,
or live in an area where the crime rate's higher, or the schools are not that great, or anything like that. Like, and that's, you know, thankfully we have that option, but like that's a lot to think about. Like, you know, okay, are we okay with a 45-minute to an hour commute one way every single day? Are we okay with, you know, do we want to do homeschooling? Do we not want to do homeschooling? Like, what are our options? And that all of that comes into play. Like, you know, if you decide to homeschool, you're buying homeschooling equipment and all this other kind of stuff. If you are deciding to commute that 45-minute away, you're putting wear and tear on your vehicle. The cost of it's when people are like, oh, you like, I think that's one of like my biggest like icks about being a military family and like non-military people, like, oh, like it must be so nice that you get like housing allowance and insurance and things like that. And I'm like, but if only you knew that it really doesn't cover the cost of a lot of things. And like, yes, we have that, but then like if you took that away, like their pay isn't great.
So it's almost like it's what they expect from military spouses, right? Military spouses we're expected to like not work to make money, right? Like a ton of nonprofits, and they expect everyone to volunteer and work for free, and they want us to do all these things for the community. But the second that you like step into the business world, people look at you like, oh, well, you should be, and you should be. And it's like, I can't hire contractor spouses if we're not a business. Like, we can't do all these things. It's the same thing when people look at us and go, oh, you guys get way too many benefits. And it's like, look, if you were to look at the wealth that military families never accumulate because they move and they move and they move and they move again, right? Mm-hmm. The fact that like we can PPM and like maybe break even on a move because, you know, one thing, you know, you made a little here with sweat equity and it covered the thing that you needed over here. You're right. It's complete nonsense. And I think like we need to stop thinking that way. And recently there was a report about like how, you know, veterans receive all these generous benefits. I think a lot of veterans are really smart about the system, right? And it's working for them. But in most cases, veterans aren't accumulating wealth and they're not taking advantage. They literally have broken their bodies. Their kids have been to like 8 schools. There's just all kinds of other. And I get that same, like the ick that you said from that statement. Cause I'm like, God, you really have no idea. Like right now, on LOGSA's page on Wednesday, we'll do a chat with Kim Cody about, you know, is it possible to even live in the present because you're planning for the future? And so you're talking about like BAH. Of course, I looked at the BAH for Fayetteville. Yeah. And then I realized very quickly, like, damn, I thought I was going to get a lot more like house. Like, we've elected to live in this little townhome because I needed my kids at the best schools possible, right? So we made a sacrifice and we're going to live in a smaller house. We're not going to have a garage. Like I love seeing the posts out here like, I want a 4-bedroom with a garage detached and for $3,500. I'm like, dude, you have no idea. Like, cause I live here now and that wasn't even possible when we got here in 2022. So we're at 4,200 in a very small townhome with no garage. And like, again, you make decisions and sacrifices based on like what you prioritize in your own family. And for us, it was athletics and and academics at this one school.
And it's crazy how that changes as your kids grow. Cause like, you know, when we first were married and we were PCSing, we did 2 PCS, well, 1 technically, I guess 2, but before we had kids, and we were like, oh yeah, like we could totally do this. Like we can do this all by ourselves. We'll pack all that, move it and everything like that. And it was great. It was just the 2 of us. We had no other like little people to worry about. And then as we had the kids and things like that, I was like, I don't want anything to do with it. I was like, I just want to sit here and answer questions. And that's all I want to do. And then as we're moving, it's like you're looking at like the school districts and you have to make all of those choices. And it's one of those things where like it takes so much brain power. And we don't even have orders yet. And I don't even know if we're going to North Carolina yet. That's just where I'm hoping we go. And that's where we're going. I don't even know if we're going there.
And I want my kid at Jack Britt because he runs track and that's the one alpha school. And right?
Yep. Like exactly. Like, you know, my kids are older. Devlin's about to go to, like, Devlin will be in 5th grade next year. So he's very close to going to middle school. So I'm like, now I have to look at middle school. And then I have to look at the elementary schools in the same area. And like, where is the best place for us? How far does Jeremy want to drive? He's going to be in this position. He's going to have late hours. Do I want him commuting an hour, you know, every morning and every evening. So then we'll never see him. Like, there's so much that goes into it where, having things stripped away from you just causes extra stress. So
yes,
I feel like if you can help, go sign the petition, whether you plan to do a PPM or not. Having that choice of, dang, like, we really need a little bit of that extra money to pay for that extra deposit, or, hey, like, we can't really afford this house, but if we offer an extra deposit or something like that, maybe they'll bring down the rent like $50. Like, there's always room for negotiation. Can't hurt to ask type of thing. But like, not having that option of saying like, oh, we can make this much money on a PPM that we can utilize to go towards this to help us be in a place that we want to be. It's really important. And I definitely feel that if you are a family who, even if you're just like, hey, I only have like one more year left, like, this isn't going to affect me. It's going to affect your buddy. It's going to affect your friend. It's going to affect, your last, move.
Will affect other entitlements down the road, right?
Yeah. If they can get away with taking one thing away, they're going to continue to take more and more away from us. And we have to stand firm. We have to stand together and say, no more. Like, we have to work together. And this is what military families need. Just because you don't think that that's what they need.
Yeah, I think of it as like the privatized housing scandal, right? Like, if that matters to you, go sign this petition as well. Because when you create these internal monopolies by allowing these single source contracts for these really big things that we do, it's not like there were only 100,000 moves a year. There are 350 to 450,000 every single year. That's a lot for one entity to be managing. And then there is no choice for us. And so we did have the PPM choice, and now that's going away. It looks just like housing management. So if you've ever had mold or dealt with bad maintenance, go and sign this, because this sets that type of precedent. Like, we need to send a signal to Congress so that they can look at Transcom and go, why did you guys ever think that one single source was going to make sense? Right? Like, maybe.
Well, and that's just blowing my mind. Like, what in any industry, one person in charge of everything is the right way to go. Like, it sounds super fishy.
It's crazy.
I would say definitely everybody needs to sign this, but not just you. Like, I think we need to talk this into the veteran community, talk this into our parents. Like, it needs to go out to a lot more than what our page obviously is going to reach, is a lot of military families. But we do have our link with Reach Across America Radio. So there's a lot of veterans that are listening to this. And if you're hearing this, it doesn't affect you personally right now, but it affects your buddies. It affects your kids who will. I mean, there's a big statistic on how veterans' kids end up becoming military. So, like, let's be real. It's going to affect your families.
Yeah. The little name up there, Audra. We're going to go do the last step for her ROTC application for a federal tuition scholarship. We do that on Thursday. Then she submits her packet, hopefully on Friday. But yeah, we've got a kiddo who's going to join the military. So it matters to her.
It does matter. And like we said, like, we can't let them continue to strip away our rights, or strip away things that are in our control, because then they're just going to continue to do it. Like, they're just going to continue saying like, oh, you guys don't need this, you don't need that, whatever. So like, it is important, and I think everyone should go. It takes 2 seconds. You can go sign the petition, share it to your page, share it with your networks, and we can only hope that this will push it back and say, hey, like, this needs to stay how it is, or we need to relook at this and make better changes, so that way our families are protected in any way that we can help protect them. Because I can't. I'm just like, dang, like, I was like so excited for PCSing, and now I'm like, oh, this is just not gonna be like, it's just another added thing to it. Like, okay, well, we can't really do it that way this time. So like, let's just hope and pray that we're going to get someone who's going to take care of our things and do the things that we asked them to do. I mean, like I said, like, the amount of times I'm like, hey, can you guys rewrap that? And the looks I got from our last movers were like, it's fine. I'm like, it's not fine, but go ahead. I'll just write it off if I need to, like, on the paper. But like, having only that one person who's contracting, like, who is brokering it, I just foresee families not getting reimbursed for damages or missing items. Absolutely. Or
So the one
It's,
neck to choke, right? The whole thing, this Transcom thing, General Alliance quote is, we can have one neck to choke, and we're already seeing how that one neck is calling back families and operating the same way that Tier 1 did. So Tier 1 was that they were historically actually the worst move manager, and they now got the contract because they bid $1 billion less than the next guy, right? But they weren't the cheapest, supposedly. I think supposedly JB Hunt was like the cheapest. And then they figured out we can't do this. I'm not sure about that. But their number was lower than the original win by $1 billion. Now they want people that are the existing movers in the system. They've offered them rates, and most movers have said there's no way. Like, we know what our break even number is, and they're offering less compensation or right at that break even. Like, why would anybody work to not make money? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, you have insurances and drivers to pay and staff, but what we've done is essentially we've created this other entity that sits on top of them, and we didn't look at the fact that this other entity, they'd already been doing this. They were managing 250 SCAT codes already. Did anyone do the research to go, well, let's kind of look at the performance of those, and let's look at how they handled claims on those? And they would have seen some things that they probably should have seen before it was then handed off to
given full permission
KBR entity, which at the end of the day, those companies, right, they are beholden to shareholders. Tier 1 is owned by Sun Capital Group. They're like, they've got shareholders. And KBR is the same thing, right? They're publicly traded. They don't care about you. You're an end user. They care about the customer and delighting the customer. Actually, that's a dying core phrase, but they care about the government customer and saying, hey, we're going to provide all these services for cheap. But where does that leave us, like those end users, right? We're going to provide these services for cheap, but we're going to maximize profits for our shareholders, for our owners, right? And that's exactly what they're doing. I mean, why else would you take half of a family's PPM budget?
Yeah, that's such a crazy amount for them to get for that too. Like, I can see them sitting at 20%, and that still pays their shareholders plenty of money. You think about thousands and thousands of military families that move. That's tons of money. But they're taking that 50 to 60% is great. That's crazy, and it's not fair at all.
But it's also normal. It's what they do. KBR, they manage a lot of contracts, and through COVID, there were some requirements at Fort Irwin, right? Less and less requirements, and their costs are just like up, like more and more and more. And you've got even money managers at Irwin that are like, this is funny, but that's government contracting. And we really should, in terms of like everybody voting, we should care, because essentially the person paying for that is the taxpayer, right? So everyone in America who works and pays taxes is a part of this, because they're paying those taxes. And then we're going to allow, again, a move manager, a broker, to come in and say, hey, military family, the government gave us $10 so you could do your move. We're going to give you $5, and we're going to keep $5. So that
we're going to keep $5. And that's just horrible. And exactly, even if you're not a part of the military community and you're listening and you have friends, share along, because like that alone should just make everyone mad. Like, you're telling us that our service members are doing all of this for our country and things like that, so we can have our rights and all this other kind of stuff. But you're only going to give them this much money and keep this much money for essentially to do nothing. And so the petition will be there. We will include that in the show notes. We will also include that on all of our platforms, so that way you guys can find it as well. And we hope that you guys join us and sign that petition and try to make this situation a little bit better for military families. As a military member who will be PCSing, this is already stressing me out to a point where I'm just like, this, I don't even want to think about it right now. So I'm just putting it on my brain.
We'll figure it out. Some families are still able to process their PPM in Mil Move, in the DPS system.
Yeah.
So if you can, when you go to your TMO, make sure you try hard to get it processed in the DPS system and not Mil Move. If they say go to Mil Move, I can already tell you, right? Those numbers are going to be terrible. But if you've already done that and you have those numbers, please go to Megan's page, PCS Like a Pro, Your Smooth Move. And she's got a thread there. You can submit what those rates are, and then I can work them backwards and figure out, I can figure out, that's where's that one really bad one? Yeah, that's a quarter. Like, here's your quarter, family. This is at this one. A mover would have gotten maybe around 10,000, right? If they are really trying to push the crappy rates that they've been telling us all, it would have been like 77. But no, they're literally like, nah, here's a quarter for you, family, a quarter, which is shitty. Sorry, which is bad because those movers, right, that they give that really bad rate to, they have trucks, they buy material wholesale. They're literally asking you to go out there with less money and pay retail.
It costs like $2 or more for a box.
Yeah,
a piece.
I don't pay that because I'm a mover. So they're actually offering me a better rate. You get a crappier rate, and you don't have wholesale pricing on your packing material, and you got to pay way more for paper, and you're paying retail for everything else, right? And like, we own blankets. You don't own blankets. You're gonna have to buy all kinds of paper to wrap all the front. It's not a good deal. Please go sign the petition. Get everyone you know to sign the petition so that we can get it to gain some traction, and then we can get it before Congress.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you everyone for listening today. We appreciate you guys. Like I said, it was a surprise episode, but it was a really important episode that we wanted to make sure that got out in front of as many people as we can possibly get it out in front of. And thank you, Isabel, for coming on. Like I said, I couldn't believe we hadn't had you guys on the podcast yet. We love you guys, and you guys do amazing things for military families, not just in moving, but in advocating for families as well. So we are so happy that you joined us today. And
thank you, Sabrina.
We'll continue to hopefully update you guys as we can get some updates. Make sure you guys are following LOGSA Mil Move as well. And as always, ruck up, Buttercup.